as well. The next one is Lieutenant Colonel Filiberto Rivera Sanchez. He completed military internationalist missions in Angola from February 22, 1990 to May 23, 1991, occupying the position of Chief of Repairs and Evacuation Company of the Tank Brigade and later as a technical specialist in the brigade. He participated in the logistic operations in support of the Cuban columns, evacuated the Malanchi and Guanzi technical group. The next one is Lieutenant Colonel Mario The next one is Colonel Jose Ribe Caballero. He fulfilled military internationalist missions in Angola from April 1985 to April 1986. He participated in several caravans of the troops. He was decorated with International Combatant Medal in the first class and Distinguished Service Medal, the Cuba-Angola Victory Medal. The fifth one is Major Joaquim Sosa Fonseca. He fulfilled military internationalist missions in Angola from June 1988 to November 1990. He held the position of Substitute Chief for the War Materiel at the 90 VTQ in Malange. He was head of repairs and evacuation company of the 60 VTQ in Wambo. 60 VTQ. He was awarded the Internationalist Combatant Medal in the second class to Distinguished Services Medal and in the Cuba-Angola Victory. The next one is Captain Elvio Torres Laboy. He fulfilled military internationalist missions in Angola from February 6, 1988 to March 26, 1990. He participated in the 24 combat missions. He was decorated with the Angola Cuba Victory Medal, the Internationalist Combatant Medal in the second class, and 2 medals of distinguished services. The seventh one is non-commissioned officer Rogel Cobas Pupo. He fulfilled military internationalist missions in Angola from June 1988 to January 1990, participated in several caravans of our troops. He was awarded the International Combatant Medal in the first class and 3 distinguished services medals. The eighth one is non-commissioned officer Jose Meneses Carmenate. He completed 6 internationalist missions in Angola from March 1985 to March 1989. He was awarded the International Combatant Medal in the second class. The ninth one is non-commissioner officer Alfonso Escalona Mora. He fulfilled military internationalist missions in Angola from 1988 to 1989, worked as a mechanic of armored vehicles and Navy in Luanda. The 10th one is Antonio Ardines del Valle. He fulfilled internationalist missions in Angola from 1983 January to January 1986 as Chief of Mechanized Infantry Platoon. He has been decorated with Distinguished Service Medals of the Revolutionary Armed Forces, the Medal of Internationalist Combatants Medal in the first class, and the Cuba-Angola Victory. The 11th one is Pedro Artega Cardenas Cardinals. He fulfilled internationalist missions in Angola from 1986 to 1989 as a service soldier, took part in more than 70 combat actions, outstanding soldier in 1986 and 1987, was awarded the Internationalist Combatant Medal in the first class, the Distinguished Service Medal, the Cuba Angola Victory Medal, and the Cuito Cuanavale Defense Medal. I have the pleasure to introduce to you my comrade Artega to come and address us on behalf of all the Cuban combatants who fought in Angola.
Good evening, everybody. On behalf of those of us who have been recognized for our participation in the historic Battle of Cuito Cuanavale, and on behalf of those who were willing to offer their life, and of more than 2,100 who gave their most precious for the true independence of the African continent, we appreciate this simple but profound tribute. The Cuban people, led by the invisible commander-in-chief, Fidel Castro, came to these African lands in a chain of the eternal debt of gratitude that we have with this continent. Nobody forced us to come. We did not receive any payment in return. We were guided only by the firm conviction to fight for the freedom and independence of the dispossessed in Africa. Ernesto Che Guevara examples of tireless fight as long as inequality and hunger exist in these lands. More than 300,000 men and women of our country were involved in this epic. For all this experience has been impossible to forget. We cannot talk about Cuito Cuanavale's battle and the wars for independence in Africa, nor about any other battle in the history of humanity if women are not enlisted in it, if the participation of the Cuban women is not mentioned. Our army of the White Coats was also dressed in olive green and was worthily represented by 4 heiresses of Mariana Grajales lineage. Adelaida Freites, Odali Chalas, Maria Cabrera, and Celia Duan were some of these examples. In Cuito Cuanavale, as the commander-in-chief acknowledged several times, the Cuban Revolution even gambled its very existence, and once again it emerged victorious. Since then, the recent history of Africa marked a watershed, and that line marks the Cuban-Angolan victory in the Battle of Cuito Cuanavale. Honor and glory to the Cuban international combatants. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much to our combatants and to our special guests that have given the diplomas to them. I also want to acknowledge, I think I skipped at the beginning, our Minister of Arts and Culture, Comrade Natim Tetwa, who is here with us, who is actually our host at this place. Comrade Nati, welcome. Before we finish off this event, I would like to call upon the 3 countries that were involved in this Battle of Cuito Cuanavale that will come and say something to us. I would like to call in front, first of all, from our sister country, Namibia, to come and say some few words on this occasion. And then we have words from Angola, and lastly, we had a few words from, and then we can go inside and then finish off the main event inside. Comrade Ambassador.
I have to apologize in advance because of my throat.
It's not working.
It's not working. It's not working.
Thank you so much. Please, can we allow our distinguished guests to go in first, followed by all our diplomats, and we can come and then of our main agenda. Thank you.
Hey, 1, 2. 1, 2. Hey, yeah. One, two, yeah. One, two, yeah.
Load the national anthem was on what you.
Oh, somebody found under the
I have actually entertained our.
there was no sound.
Here.
Yes, yes. Here, because here you are giving the floor to Kosato. Kosato is here?
No, I don't know whether they will arrive, but so.
Are you going to read the name? Yes.
He will come here, Namibian ambassador.
Al principio porque se quedó pendiente de afuera y hay que ponerlo ahora. Pero si Kosato no está, tiene que quitarlo.
Okay. We have to remove Kosato. They said these are the ones who are here. The president of Kosato is not here, so he's not going to speak anything. So we skip the president of Kosato. Then we go with the Communist Party who's here.
Sorry.
Communist Party. And this is the name of the lady from the Communist Party. Okay? And then we have the Vesta. The Vesta are also here.
That gentleman was telling me that after the CEO had spoken,
You have the
we must.
Namibia.
Is it fine?
Yes.
What are his names?
His name.
Just about to start, so lend me your ears. I'm giving you 30 seconds. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to request you to all rise for the following national anthems. We will start by not a national anthem, but by an African anthem, African Union anthem. It will be followed by the South African national anthem. Last and definitely not least, we will hear the Cuban national anthem.
Victories won for our liberation.
You may be seated. The program is just about to commence in 30 seconds. Your Excellency, Rodolfo Benitez Vezon, Ambassador of Cuba to South Africa. Honorable Ms. Baleka Mbete, Speaker of the National Parliament, Speaker of the National Assembly. Former President of the Republic of South Africa, Mr. Halima Motlanthe. Comrade Zdumo Dlamini, President of COSATU. Comrade Riva Fourie, Secretariat Coordinator of the Central Committee of the South African Communist Party. Ms. Jane Mufamadi, Chief Executive Officer of Freedom Park. Esteemed guests, ladies and gentlemen, receive warm greetings. We are now ready to proceed with the second part of the function. In addition, to honor our heroes on the occasion of the 30th anniversary of the Battle of Cuito Cuanavale, today's event is also an opportunity to pay tribute to the legacy of the great Nelson Mandela in the year of his centenary and to celebrate the month and the Day of Africa. I'd therefore like not to waste time. I would like to call upon Ms. Jane Mufamadi, CEO of Freedom Park, to officially welcome us to this prestigious institution.
Dekwana batho botwana President Halima Motlanthe, the former President of the Republic of South Africa, the Speaker of the National Assembly, Ma Baleka Mbete, our Chairperson of the Portfolio Committee of Arts and Culture, Mayor Xoliswa Tom, our Minister, our shareholder, Minister Natim Tetwa, the Ambassador of Cuba, Excellency Rodolfo Benitez Vezon, the High Commissioner of Namibia, His Excellency Mr. Mwiwete, the representative of the Embassy of Angola, other ambassadors and high commissioners present here, the Secretary General of the African National Congress, Comrade Ace Magashule, the President of COSATU, Comrade Zdumo Dlamini, representing the South African Communist Party, Comrade Fourie, the member of the Freedom Park Council, Professor Nkondo, the Vice Chancellor and Principal of UNISA, Mr. Makanya, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, I've also seen the Deputy Minister of Small Business and Development, Deputy Minister Matale, amongst us. It gives me great pleasure to extend to you all a very warm welcome on behalf of Freedom Park. I am truly honored this evening to welcome in particular the Embassy of Cuba and the rest of the Friends of Cuba, and also the veterans who participated in the Battle of Cuito Cuanavale. We are here to celebrate the centenary of Freedom Park's patron-in-chief, President Mandela. And this celebration is taking the form of the commemoration of the 30th anniversary of the Battle of Cuito Cuanavale. Freedom Park tells the story of a nation and its people who were subjected to the most brutal forms and infringement and abuse of the basic human rights. And thus, we provide a space and a voice to the often untold history of South Africa, of Southern Africa, and its people. This is the shrine where we honor with all the dignity they deserve those who endured pain, so we should experience the joy of freedom. However, as we celebrate our achievements and also what we call the triumph of the human spirit, it is crucial that we never forget those who came to our aid during our hour of need. Freedom Park was born as a national and international icon of humanity and freedom. And it is for this reason that we collaborate with embassies like Embassy of Cuba to commemorate such events that contributed to our attainment of freedom and democracy. Such events, to us, particularly South African, they help us to reflect upon our past, interpret our present and what is happening, and also imagine a better future. And that is why, particularly as the agency and an entity of the Department of Arts and Culture, we do this hoping that this will foster the spirit of reconciliation, social cohesion, and nation building. It is also important to note that the idea of remembering, of preserving this history here at Freedom Park is not so that we harbor the spirit of bitterness and vengeance, but to draw lessons from the past mistakes so that they are never repeated. We always say here at Freedom Park that we wish 1,000 years to come, if there is strife again in our country, people will come to Freedom Park to draw lessons, to understand how the previous generation, which is us, went about resolving their conflicts and moving forward as a united nation. The Battle of Cuito Cuanavale in Angola marked a watershed moment in the struggle for freedom and humanity in Southern Africa, as I've already said. And here at Freedom Park, we also say that as part of this commemoration, and also related to today's event, we are also fulfilling the TRC mandate on the need for symbolic reparations. And that is why we have conceptualized and constructed the Wall of Names to honor the heroes and heroines who paid the ultimate price, as I've indicated, so that we can be free today. This wall that embraces where we are here, which we call Skumbuto, comprise the 8 major conflicts that shaped what today we call South Africa. And in doing so, we started from the pre-colonial wars, the wars of resistance, the genocide of the Khoi and San, slavery, the South African War, the World War I and II, and also the liberation struggle, which has been categorized in the 4 pillars: the underground struggle, the armed struggle, the mass struggle, as well as international solidarity. To date, Mr. President and Minister, we have inscribed 139,000 names across the 8 conflicts that I have mentioned. And of these names, we have about 2,289 names of the Cubans who died in African soil. These are some of the comrades of the few that we've been honoring outside today. And they were honored under the liberation struggle in the subcategory International Solidarity. Also in our museum, which we call the Dream, Kapo, which is a Nama word for dream, we have narrated the role of other countries, such as Angola, and many others who contributed to our freedom and democracy. I am also glad that we have so many high commissioners and ambassadors and also members of the diplomatic corps amongst us, because this is work in progress, as we did with the Cubans. And Minister, very soon we are going to also unveil the names of the Russians and many others. We also want to work with the embassies to collect more names, particularly from Southern Africa, as part of the African Liberation Heritage Project, so that Freedom Park is not a uniquely South African, but the center of the struggle for humanity, but also the struggle of all Africans, so that everybody from everywhere, when they come to Freedom Park, they see themselves and their stories reflected one way or the other. We have also within the gallery of leaders, Mr. President, honored leaders such as President Fidel Castro, President Mandela, also amongst other leaders like Lillian Ngoyi, Charlotte Mateke, Steve Biko, Robert Sobukwe, and many more. To date, we have about 43 names in the gallery of leaders. And the gallery has been categorized in terms of the national, continental, and international leaders. Amongst others, Julius Nyerere, Samora Machel, and also Agostinho Neto and Che Guevara. And therefore, you can see that we are trying to be as inclusive as possible, because we know that as South Africans, our stories will not be complete because it is intertwined and linked with other stories. And therefore, in conclusion, I just want to say that as we commemorate this battle, as we honor our patron in chief, we remember what President Mandela said in 1995, and I open quote, "Cubans came to our regions as doctors, teachers, soldiers, agricultural experts, but never as colonizers. They have shared the same trenches with us in the struggle against colonialism, underdevelopment, and apartheid. Hundreds of Cubans have given their lives, literally, in the struggle that was first and foremost not theirs but ours. As Southern Africans, we salute them. We vow never to forget this unparalleled example of selfless internationalism." I close quote. And having said that, I welcome you and I thank you.
Another big round of applause for CEO of Freedom Park. Freedom Park is an agency of the Department of Arts and Culture. The head of the Department of Arts and Culture is none other than Mr. Nathi Mthethwa. Minister, there's a song, perhaps you know it, it's called "Save the Best for Last." You were not acknowledged initially. Ladies and gentlemen, in our midst, we have the Minister of Arts and Culture, Mr. Nkosinathi Mthethwa. Ladies and gentlemen, in our midst, we have the Secretary General of the African National Congress. I'm sure I don't need to mention his name. hence the claps before I can even mention the name, is none other than Magashule. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, let us continue with our program. I would now like to take this opportunity to call upon His Excellency, the Namibian Ambassador, Mr. Vaikon K. Gikwete. Put your hands together as he comes to the podium.
Thank you very much, Program Directors. This cold front has done something to me since yesterday. My apology. Director of Ceremonies, our host, Madam Jane Mfamadi, CEO of Freedom Park, Your Excellency, Kgalema Motlanthe, former President of South Africa, Your Excellency, the Honorable Speaker of the National Assembly, Comrade Baleka Mbete, Your Excellency, Ambassador Gerardo Mazzola of Cuba, Your Excellency and the Honorable Minister Mutetwa, SG, Comrade Asa Magashule, Secretary General of African National Congress, Your Excellencies, Ambassadors and High Commissioners and members of Diplomatic Corps, all protocol observed, ladies and gentlemen, comrades and friends. It is indeed a great pleasure and honor to have been invited to say some few words on this special occasion, 30 years after the Battle of Cuito Cuanavale, honoring Comrade Nelson Mandela's legacy in solidarity with Cuba in the year of his centenary. Briefly, I should say that the Battle of Cuito Cuanavale took place at the height of the Cold War and was not only a military battle, but was also a battle of ideas and indeed a battle of ideological warfare. It pitted the apartheid forces against the revolutionary armed forces of Cuba, otherwise known as Cuban internationalists. I'm really indeed honored because these are the comrades now speaking as a field commander and the regional political commissar of the Northern Front during the war of the liberation of Namibia. These comrades, we shared trenches together in Angola, in southern Angola, and I'm really honored that we have those heroes who took part in the battles, not only at Cuito Cuanavale, but in various battles in Angola, particularly southern Angola. In actual fact, the Battle of Cuito Cuanavale was waged between 1985 and 1988, at the beginning of which there were only FAPLA and UNITA beefed up by a large contingent of South African apartheid regime defense force. Only during the latter half of 1987, that plans were put together or were underway to get the Cubans and SWAPO forces, those were the member of the People's Liberation Army of Namibia, the military wing of SWAPO, to get involved in these battles. The reason for that was to deal the enemy a final blow that could digress, free Angola from the foreign occupation, and in the process, bring about the independence of Namibia. This strategic objective was achieved in a very firm way. We could talk about the Battle of Cuito Cuanavale for months, but I just want to say that people always ask, why is this Battle of Cuito Cuanavale important to Namibia, South Africa, Southern Africa, Africa, and the world? It culminated or gave birth to Namibia's independence, the last colony in Africa, via the implementation of the UN Security Council Resolution 435, and the rest is history. It put the final nail, that's the Battle of Cuito Cuanavale. It put the final nail in the coffin of apartheid South Africa, leading to the demise of the democratization of South Africa in 1994, and thereby ending the destabilization of the region by the racist apartheid regime. The Battle of Cuito Cuanavale brought about the end of the liberation struggle, and thereby the dissolution of the OAU Liberation Committee, the frontline states, and the emergency of democratization almost in the whole continent. In brief, comrades and friends, Director of Ceremonies, we remembered and salute those who have laid their lives. They laid their precious lives for the freedom of Angola, total independence of Namibia, and Southern Africa in general. It made our fellow comrades who participated in the liberation struggle of our independence to lay down their previous precious lives for the freedom we continue to cherish. These were gallant sons and daughters of Angola, Cuba, Namibia, and South Africa. With deep gratitude and appreciation, we thank all the frontline states and the entire peace-loving people of the world for their sacrifices and the relentless support to all the freedom fighters of this great region of Southern Africa. What else can we say? We say to our fallen heroes and heroines of the liberation struggle for freedom and independence of Africa that their blood waters our freedom. And I thank you.
Another big round of gratitude. Ladies and gentlemen, that was His Excellency, Mr. Cuito Cuanavale, the Namibian ambassador. Without wasting much time, I would like to call upon to the podium Comrade Zdumo Dlamini, President of the Congress of South African Trade Unions, COSATU. Please give him a big round of applause as he approaches the podium.
Thank you very much, Program Director. To our leadership, as they have been introduced both politically, particularly our former President Kgalema Motlanthe, the leadership of our government led by the Speaker, our Minister, the ambassadors of our family that cause us to be here in commemorating particularly the Cuban ambassador, Comrade Rodolfo, and just the whole of the diplomatic corps, the leadership of the alliance that has been introduced, members of the Solidarity Network, focus in particular, and other Solidarity Network comrades present here, ladies and gentlemen, and I mustn't omit our CEO who have set the tone for this evening, and I thank you very much, my sister. I stand here on behalf of the Congress of the South African Trade Unions, which will always cherish the life of our father, Fidel Castro, our father, Nelson Mandela, because we as the workers in South Africa, who would have been amongst those at the center of receiving the scourge of a very, very vicious system of apartheid, will always, when we remember these great giants of our soil, and say that if they were not there, maybe we wouldn't be standing on these platforms freely to express ourselves as workers and as we do even this evening. So when we remember them, all what we can say is that we are inspired, we can grow better, we can indeed continue to preserve and attain our dignity because they lived the life. They went through these experiences which always teach us to look at them and then say, we can go on. The struggle continues. The battle lines are clear. We know our friends, we know our enemies, and we understand what forms of engagements need to be employed at different times. So we are glad that, and as we can quote what Tata Mandela would have said about our father, Fidel Castro, when he said, there is one place where Cuba stands out head and shoulders above the rest. That is in its love for human rights and liberty, close quote. He said those words to inspire all of us as we relate to the struggle of the Cuban people who have led their lives and laid their lives, as it has been eloquently put by our leader from Namibia so well, that we continue to benefit as the workers. We have programs that we have exchanged with the Cubans, where we have sent workers to be equipped with the knowledge they need to understand the battle they are engaged in at all material times. But we also continue to benefit from the experiences of the Cuban people through the programs between our governments, which are as a result of these relations that were born out of the struggle relationship between our Tata Mandela and Baba Fidel Castro. We can talk about the Cuban medical doctors that continue to take care of us, even in our deep rural areas. Those are programs that will always look at them and said, indeed, as a generation, we were fortunate to have had these leaders living before us. But what do we do, as I want to say and sit down, because we simply are here to celebrate and commemorate. What do we do when we emulate, when we study, when we read about these leaders? But as a nation, South Africa, we also ought to remember that there are still others that are still not free, both in our country but also in the continent. The people of Western Sahara are still not free. We can even dare to say Swaziland is not yet free. We can say poverty, hunger, dispossessedness, landlessness is still inflicting many of our people in the continent Africa. And what can we do together as a country to lend a hand of help in those countries, inspired, of course, by these leaders that have gone before us and sacrificed so much. So we celebrate them by organizing ourselves into very effective, strong instruments that advance change in our country. And bringing the point even closer home, that Magashule, to say this alliance that is led by the African National Congress has got to remain relevant. It remains relevant. It remains a beacon of hope for this country to cherish and continue to carry through this task. We dare fail. And indeed, as COSATU, we say, we're not going to fail that task of ensuring that our unity, our resolve to unite the country and deal with the issues that are confronting us is going to be very, very critical going forward. And in that way, we shall continue to honor these heroes we are celebrating today. I thank you very much.
Another big round of applause for Mr. Zdumo Dlamini, President of the Congress of South Africa, COSATU. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, the South African Communist Party is also present with us here tonight. Let me ask Comrade Riva Fourie, member of the Central Committee of the South African Communist Party, to address us on behalf of the Communist Party. Put your hands together as she comes to the podium.
Political leadership of the Republic of South Africa, including the leadership of the Alliance, Ambassador, Leadership of Government, in particular Minister of Arts and Culture, Comrade Natin Tetwa, Ambassador of Cuba, other ambassadors and members of the diplomatic corps present here today, comrades, ladies and gentlemen. The bond that exists between the people of South Africa and the people of Cuba, as was demonstrated by the relationship that existed between Comrades Nelson Mandela and Comrade Fidel Castro, is a bond that has been forged through joint struggles against imperialism. The month of May, Africa Month, is the period where we particularly remember the contribution of the rest of Africa to the liberation of South Africans. We cannot pay homage to the significant support given to us by countries like Algeria, Zambia, Tanzania, and Mozambique, amongst others, nor can we commemorate the heroic battles fought against SADF by members of SWAPO's plan and MPLA's FAPLA from the mid-1960s to the late 1980s, without acknowledging the contribution of the Cuban soldiers that fought side by side for our liberation as South Africans. We painfully recall the lives lost in the CIA-aided, SADF-driven Operation Savannah in Angola, and Cuba's heroic aid provided through Operation Carlota. We painfully recall the further lives lost through SADF's Operation Reindeer, Operation Protea, and Operation Askari. And as South Africans, we celebrate with pride the ultimate defeat of the apartheid regime's military wing at the battle, or the military might at the Battle of Cuito Cuanavale, which resulted in the liberation of Namibia and contributed to paving the way for a negotiated settlement in South Africa. Progressive South Africans are inspired by Cuba. We draw inspiration from your internationalism, the compassionate and unselfish humanitarianism displayed towards the oppressed across the world, despite your limited resources, reminds us of the importance of international solidarity. We draw inspiration from the egalitarian lifestyle of Cubans, which confirms to us that an alternative economic socialism such as economic system such as socialism, that it can succeed, and that a lifestyle beyond individualism and materialism is possible. Significantly too, we draw inspiration from the resilience of the Cuban people. The US trade embargo since 1960 aimed at starving the Cuban people into a rebellion against socialism. Their efforts failed. The deep sense of patriotism, unity, and national pride that you displayed throughout this horrific economic isolation enforced by the United States of America inspires us as South Africans to fight less amongst ourselves. The fact that Cuba has, despite its isolation, managed to secure the highest literacy rates and the best healthcare service provision in the world inspires us to reverse our high levels of poverty and unemployment, given our abundance of resources, and to accelerate service delivery to our people. Your resilience inspires us to break our silence about the reality that America, after 58 years, still succeeds to deprive the generous, principled, and bold people of Cuba the right to trade, and consciously curtails your right to optimize your economic and social development. The world cannot be silent when an island so beautiful, with so much potential, is being prevented access to opportunities to modernize systems, infrastructure, and equipment. Within this context, South Africa cannot be scaling down its training of medical students in Cuba. We cannot, after less than 3 decades, have forgotten the sacrifices that were made in order for us to have a non-racial democracy that we enjoy today. Our loyalty to those who have sacrificed everything so that we can be free can never be compromised. On behalf of the South African Communist Party, we want to thank the Cuban Embassy for arranging this event tonight. Occasions such as these remind us that we should never forget the price that was paid for our freedom. Occasions such as these remind us that we should never abandon our old friends for the sake of expediency. We wish to assure the people of Cuba that you are not alone in your call for the embargo to be lifted. You are not alone in your demand that the US should vacate Guantanamo Bay. We will not watch silently in the wake of efforts to kill the Cuban economy and to undermine Cuban sovereignty. An injury to one is an injury to all. A luta continua.
Another big round of applause for Reneva Fori, who was representing the communist organization. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, now join me as I usher to the podium Comrade Ace Magashule, General Secretary of the African National Congress, who will speak on behalf of the ANC.
Amandla. Long live the ANC, long live. Long live Cuba, long live. Long live the spirit of Nelson Mandela, long live. Long live the spirit of Commandant Fidel Castro, long live. Long live the spirit of Che Guevara, long live. Program Director, Your Excellency, the Cuban Ambassador to South Africa, Comrade Ronaldo Ferson, our former President, Comrade Kgalema Motlanthe, our Minister, Comrade Nati, Speaker of the National Assembly, Comrade Balek Mbete, distinguished guests, the leadership of the Alliance, COSATU, SACP, Comrades Dumo, the coordinator of the Secretariat of the Central Committee of the South Africans, the Friends of Cuba, the Communist Party, Comrade Reneva Fori, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. On this occasion of the day of the 30th anniversary celebration of the epoch-making Battle of Cuito Cuanavale, and the celebration of the remarkable leadership role of the two outstanding titans of our revolution, Comrade Mandela, the father of the South African nation, and Comrade Fidel Castro, the commander-in-chief of the Cuban Revolution, we convey as the African National Congress our revolutionary greetings. And on behalf of the leadership of the National Executive Committee and the entire membership of the ANC and the people of our country, we express our sincere words of gratitude and appreciation to this memorable, great historic day. To our ambassadors throughout the continent, this most auspicious day represents the hallmark of the catalog of the history of struggles of our people against oppressive and exploitative system of imperialism and colonialism. This day occasions great bonds of friendship and brotherhood built over centuries of incalculable acts of solidarity and internationalism. This solemn occasion is a living testimony that ours is a rich history of struggles of brothers and sisters from the other womb of the mother. Even if our horizons are far apart in the imaginations of our geographic maps, the scientific truth is that we are too close to each other by the biology of the genes of blood streams flowing through our veins and vessels. Our indestructible bonds of friendship flow from the fountain of the wisdom and teachings of one of the greatest apostles of human civilization, Apostle Jose Marti, when he says, I quote, "Our homeland is humanity." And indeed, in the words of the Commander-in-Chief, when he says, I quote, "Our country is not just Cuba. Our country is humanity," close quote. The great Battle of Cuito Cuanavale remains an inflammable torch to illuminate many of the generations of men to come, of many to come. We as the African National Congress dedicate this day to the heroic memories of José Antonio Aponte, the first African free slave to lead an insurrection against Spanish colonialism in Cuba. We decorate the beautiful memories of this day by remembering the heroic, exemplary leadership role of this great descendant of the Angolan people. With unprecedented cruelty, this great son of the soil of the African continent was executed by the Spanish military tribunal on the 9th of April, 1812, in the city of Havana. We cherish the glorious and heroic path by this indomitable warrior of our people. His were extraordinary acts of courage humanity shall forever seek to emulate. We dedicate this day to the living memories of one of the most illustrious heroes of the struggle for the emancipation of slave people, Comrade Carlota. She illustrated the centrality of the leadership role of women in the struggle against capitalism and all its manifestation of patriarchy by becoming the first slave woman to lead a rebellion against Spanish slave masters in Cuba. The body of this beautiful flower of the descendants of the Angolan people was torn apart into pieces by horses which were chained to move into different directions. We shall forever and always salute the human gesture by the Cuban Revolution to have named the first major military operations on the African continent after this martyr of our revolution to be Operation Carlota. We dedicate this day to the living memories of most revered revolutionary leader of our national liberation movement, President Reginald Oliver Tambo. Our inspiration on solidarity and internationalism is derived from the leadership role of this erstwhile revolutionary and the longest-serving president of our movement, the African National Congress. These are his profound revolutionary words he expressed during the first Congress of MPLA in Luanda, 1977. In the very first hours of our existence, People's Republic of Angola had to defend itself against the massive military onslaught of a mature but decaying imperialist system. The trials that confronted the MPLA even before November 11, 1975, right through to 1976, when the racist oppressor army of the Foster regime was evicted from Angola, were not a test only on the valor and military preparedness of MPLA and the people of Angola. The results of the contest have now become a matter of proud historical record. Progress triumphant over reaction, thanks to the heroic sacrifices of the people of Angola, supported by their progressive African allies, by Cuba, by Soviet Union and other socialist countries, and by all peoples advancing towards progress. What started as a triumphant march by the forces of reaction into the heart of Angola ended up with a deeper crisis for the Foster regime in South Africa itself. The humiliating defeat of Foster army was at the same time defeat of the social system for which that army had been created, trained and armed to defend. The myth of the invisibility of the racist army was destroyed forever. For the fascist regime of Foster, whose ultimate and principal means of survival is naked brute force, this was a stunning blow. We dedicate this day to the living memories of two renowned revolutionaries of our country, our struggle icons, President Nelson Mandela and the Commander-in-Chief Fidel Castro. The two leaders of our revolution taught the world that humanity and human generosity is the most fulfilling, highest form of solidarity. The Commander-in-Chief of the Cuban Revolution, Fidel Castro, has to say the following profound revolutionary words about the Battle of Cuito Cuanavale. I quote, "The decisive battle should not be waged on the terrain chosen by the enemy. The decisive battle must be waged on the terrain chosen by one's own forces, and the enemy must be hit in sensitive, truly strategic places," close quotes. In his own words, President Nelson Mandela, during his first visit to the Republic of Cuba, just after his release from jail, had to say the following profound words at a rally organized in the province of Matanzas, where the South African Communist Party held its last Congress in the underground. And I quote, "The history of Africa will be written as before and after Cuito Cuanavale. The Battle of Cuito Cuanavale was the turning point in the struggles for the liberation of the continent and our people from the lash of apartheid," close quote. The fraternal relations between the people of Cuba and the African continent is a journey emanating from the early times of the emergence of modern capitalism. The roots of our historical relations are found in the appalling history of the scramble of the superpowers for the expansion of new markets and accumulation of raw material. We shall forever be inspired by the words of generosity. The leader of Cuban Revolution, Comrade Raul Castro, during the first Congress of MPLA in 1977, when he said, and I quote, "The day our presence here is no longer necessary. Only the people of Angola will be able to issue that order. And when the Cubans here for the purpose withdraw from Angola, we will take with us neither oil, nor diamonds, nor coffee, nor anything else. All that we will take with us is the indestructible friendship of this great people and the remains of our dead," close quote. During a solemn ceremony of the last contingent of the Cuban combatants to come back home at the Pantheon of General Antonio Maceo, the Commander-in-Chief said the following words of welcome. Open quotes, "We place our trust in you. Welcome back, comrades. The homeland receive you, grateful and proud." And later during the same year, at the occasion of the anniversary of General Marco, Fidel Castro declared the carrying of Operation Tribute throughout the island. In an emotionally charged speech, he said, open quote, "At this very same moment, simultaneously in every corner of the country from which they came, the remains of all the internationalists who fell in the fulfillment of their noble and glorious missions are being laid to rest. Humanity shall forever salute the indispensable, far-reaching acts of heroism by the men and women of the Cuban Revolution. We salute their immeasurable acts of heroism in the battlefields alongside many of our brothers and sisters in Algeria, Guinea-Bissau, Ethiopia, Somalia, Sudan, Angola, Zambia, Namibia, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and our own country, South Africa. The Cuban Revolution remains to be an unshakable ambassador of the revolutionary world movement in the current period of the most complex and hostile world dominated by imperialism and neocolonialism. The revolution remains to be the best political school of solidarity and internationalism from the entire world revolution. We therefore take this opportunity on this great day to join the international community, demanding for the immediate end of the economic blockade by US government against the people of Cuba. We call on President Trump to return to the path of peaceful way of resolving the relations of the two nations on the mutual principle of respect of territorial integrity and sovereignty. And we want to agree with the South African Communist Party. We need to continue with the program of Commandant Fidel Castro as well as Nelson Mandela. That education program is very, very important for South Africa. And to the Cubans and Angola and all those who fought for this freedom, a luta continua. The struggle and the long walk to freedom, we need to move forward and continue waging our struggle until we have defeated poverty, inequality, and all the ills, social ills in the entire world. A luta continua. Amandla.
A luta continua indeed. Thank you, Comrade Ace. Ladies and gentlemen, do not say I was not elaborate enough. I did say the Minister of Arts and Culture is here with us. Join me in welcoming him to the podium. Minister.
Thank you, Program Director. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Do you still remember the song, Cuban People Loving People? Here we are, far from home. To the former President of the Republic of South Africa, President Motlanthe, Mama, the Speaker of the National Assembly, Mama Mbete, who's here with us, the Deputy Minister in absentia, I'm told he's left, Deputy Minister Matale, the Ambassador of Cuba, Comrade Benito Vesson, His Excellency, the Ambassador of Namibia, Ngiwete, my brother, the Chairperson of the Portfolio Committee of Arts and Culture in the National Assembly, Ms. Tom, the ANC Secretary General here with us, S.G. Magashule, Ms. Fori from the Communist Party, SACP, Comrade Stumo Lamini, the President of COSATU. We have Professor Makanya here with us. We have Professor Nkondo, who are here. The commanders, commissars, combatants, revolutionaries, the internationalists who survived Cuito Cuanavale, who are here with us. Salute to you. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. It's an important day. It's a day of reflection, of Africa reflecting the road we have traveled for our freedom on this beautiful continent. We meet also on the month of Africa Month, and coincidentally, we are looking and reflecting on the role of Cuba to Cuito Cuanavale, but looking at the role of Cuba generally on the continent Africa, the sacrifices the internationalists of Cuba have made to have our continent free as we experience it today. We're also meeting during the year where we commemorate the centenary of Ma Albertina Sisulu and the late President Nelson Mandela. Had they lived, both of them would have turned 100 years this year. We are hosting this also remembering El Comandante, President Fidel Castro, his role to humanity. This year in South Africa also marks the 40th anniversary of the untimely death of that combatant, an African liberation fighter, Professor Mangaliso Sobuku. These giants of our country lived because they had surrendered their very being to the people. They lived because their very being embodied love, an idea, a hope, an aspiration, a vision of our collective destination. Like those combatants and internationalists that laid down their lives on the African soil in defense of peace and social progress. The dawn of peace in Africa in general, and SADC in particular, can be traced back to 30 years ago, during that titanic battle between the forces of peace, democracy, and social progress against racist forces supported by one of the most backward and cruelest regimes on the face of the earth at Cuito Cuanavale. Today is the 30th anniversary of this epic battle, and the South African government joins the international community in observing this historic encounter. We're observing this historic encounter under the theme commemorating and celebrating the 30th anniversary of the Battle of Cuito Cuanavale. I believe that if SADC member states were charged with the responsibility to decide on a common date to commemorate freedom and independence, it is possible that March 23rd, 1988 may be easily agreed upon. Thirty years ago, this day became pivotal in bringing closure to the serial aggression of the racist SADF throughout the region with dramatic consequences. It was a strategic watershed event with not only regional but also even global significance, often referred to as the largest battle on the African soil since World War II. The effects of this battle were felt far and wide, and commenting from prison on Robben Island, President Nelson Mandela said, and I quote, "Cuito Cuanavale marks the turn in the struggle to liberate the continent and our country from apartheid. The defeat of the racist army in Cuito Cuanavale allowed people of Namibia to finally reach their liberation. The defeat of apartheid served as inspiration for the fighting people of South Africa." Fidel Castro, whose Cuban forces were instrumental in assisting the Angolan government, had this to say, and I quote, "The victory of Africa will come to be written as before and after Cuito Cuanavale," close quote. El Comandante Castro showed quite pride in this achievement, demonstrating a deep understanding of the situation. Behind this singular achievement was outstanding military acumen. He was not the gambler depicted by our detractors. The essence of the conflict was the struggle for true African independence against racism and colonialism. Colonel Breitenbach, commander of the notorious and controversial 32 Battalion, wrote the following words about the 23rd of March, 1988, and I quote, "The UNITA soldiers did a lot of dying that day, and the full weight of Fabla's offensive fire was brought down on the heads of the SADC regiment, President Steyn, and already bleeding UNITA," close quote. On the 28th of August 1988, the State Security Council held in South Africa, held its meeting in the Union buildings, where the following comments, amongst others, were recorded in the minutes of the meeting. The consequences after Cuito Cuanavale, South African government is in the obligation to accept Resolution 435 from the United Nations, the independence of Southwest Africa. 2, President P.W. Botha used powers of the Constitution to delegate Dr. Neil Barnard, Chief of the National Intelligence, to prepare the negotiations with Mr. Nelson Mandela for future freedom. 3, all attempts at displaying FAPLA from the last postage stamp of land on the east bank of Cuito Cuanavale had failed. Even the SADC High Command was finally convinced that it was impossible to destroy the enemy bridgehead from the east without massive increase in South African forces and loss of hundreds of South African lives. Such high death toll would of itself have been politically unacceptable in the Republic of South Africa. 3 attempts to Tambo was the only dear defeat the SADC had suffered nothing for us, close quote. The SADC clearly outpaced, was clearly, excuse me, Ambassador, you are not alone. I joined you. The SADC was clearly outpaced and outmaneuvered in Angola. Magnus Malanda, then Minister of Defense in South Africa, admitted that the prowess, tenacity, and professionalism of Cubans in the following statement, and I quote, "As far as the defense force was concerned, Fidel Castro was an unknown presence in military terms, and therefore it was difficult to predict his intentions," close quotes. This amount to an intelligence failure of the worst proportion, as it came more than a decade after SADC first encountered the Cubans in Angola during the 1975-1976 aggression. Malan was not alone in this ignorance. The Americans had been in confrontation with Havana since the 1960s and appeared to know no better. Because of the embargo, Chester Crocker, chief negotiator for the United Nations, had to be given a special exemption in order to meet with George Rescott, the head of the Cuban delegation. Crocker admitted, and I quote, "Reading the Cubans is yet another art form. They are prepared for both war and peace. We witness considerable tactical finesse and genuinely creative moves at the table," close quote. The central negotiation issue was the UN Security Council 435 concerning South Africa's withdrawal from Namibia and the departure of Cuban troops from Angola. It is history that the last SADC soldier left Angola at the end of August 1988, and that Namibia became independent in 1990, even before the Cuban troops' exodus from Angola. One cannot contest the assertion that the Battle of Cuito Cuanavale was a turning point that brought the border war to an end and led to peace negotiations that saw the withdrawal of SADC, MK, and Cuban forces from Angola and Namibia that ultimately led to the independence of Namibia. President O.R. Tambo, addressing the 7th summit meeting of the Preferential Trade Area in Eastern and Southern states, in Eastern and Southern African states, had this to say about this epic battle. But of course, these developments are even more immediately related to the historic defeat of the apartheid war machine in southern Angola. Pretoria's attempt to inflict a decisive defeat on Angolan government forces at the Cuito Cuanavale ended in humiliation of SADC, its retreat from Angola, and the collapse of Botha Malan dreams in that area. Indeed, the defense of Cuito Cuanavale will go down as an historic turning point in Southern Africa, and quite conceivably as Pretoria's Waterloo. We pay tribute to the heroism, fighting skills, and determination of the joint Angolan, Cuban, and SWAPO forces that have driven the racist aggressors from the soil of the People's Republic of Angola, changing the face of Southern Africa, close quote. What materialized at Cuito Cuanavale set in chain a process that finally broke the ascendance of the military hawks in Pretoria. Together with the popular mass struggles within South Africa and apartheid international isolation, the country's freedom was soon achieved. The progressive forces of South Africa share a long history and heritage with Cuba, who occupies a prominent place as an ally in our struggle for liberation within the African continent. It is fitting that here at Freedom Park, the names of 2,289 Cuban soldiers who fell in Angola between 1975 and 1988 are inscribed along those of the South African revolutionaries who died during decades-long liberation struggle. Those patriots and internationalists were motivated by a single goal: the end of an oppressive racial rule and genuine African independence. After 13 years defending Angolan sovereignty, the Cubans took nothing home except the mortal remains of their fallen comrades and Africa's gratitude for the service they have rendered to humanity. We thank all progressive, peace-loving people throughout the world for supporting the liberation struggle in its entirety. It was at the cost of tens of thousands of lives that Angola, Namibia, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, to mention a few, gained political independence from colonial and racist rule during the decades between 1974 and 1994. One cannot belittle the enormous sacrifices of the struggle for national liberation and independence from colonial and racist rule of the bygone area, of the bygone age. Those sacrifices were not in vain. And we are here today to say to Cuban people, those loving people, that you never fought a battle in vain. You fought for all of us, not only for Africa, but for humanity as a whole. Our freedom is forever, as it was written with blood of our fallen comrades, whose sacrifices will be remembered. They will be cherished and celebrated for eternity. A Vitoria, a sempre. Victory always.
Yes, Minister, the Cuito Cuanavale battle was not in vain. Let us proceed. We do have some entertainment in the house. Miss Philippa Dia de Villiers, an award-winning South African writer and performance artist who has performed her work nationally and internationally with enormous success. She is noted for her poetry, which has been published in collections and in many magazines and anthologies. Among her many awards are the National Arts Festival, D. Buren Writing Beyond the Fringe Prize, which she won in 2009, and many more. Esteemed guests, join me as I welcome Philippa Ya de Villiers to the podium.
Thank you very much for the honor of being able to recite a poem for you. And I would just like to say thank you very much to Cuba for inviting me to be that person. I went to Cuba with our poet laureate, whose words, need I remind anyone again that armed struggle is an act of love, gave the world the greatest contradiction, because it's all about love. I thought Dos Gardenias was the national anthem of Cuba. The love that you have shown has given us to ourselves courage. It takes more. It takes more than blood to be alive, more than breath to find your life, more than a hand to throw a stone. It takes a heart beaten into bricks and built into a house where humanity finds a home. The house is in the street, and the street lies on a land of corpses and speeches, a land of lies. The lies that we tell to keep the best for our own country and family. God, what we can manage is our own. But the best of us are rivers that give themselves to oceans, rivers that throw themselves over cliffs into oceans, rivers that never look back, never regret what they've given. And the more they give, the more flows out. The more they give, the more flows out. The more they give. Won't you walk behind Mandela? Follow his feet along Justice Streets. Won't you, will you build your heart into a home for all humanity? He was not alone. A million hands held him up. And there is no wall without foundation, no shelter without roof, no Mandela without Sisulu, without Mbeki, without Dadu. No Biko without Ngoyi, Sebukwe, Goldberg, no Fisher without Slovo, without thirst. And will you walk behind them, shout freedom through your thirst? Spend your breath on justice, to freedom or to death. It takes more than you think you have, but you are a river, like how Cubans are rivers. River, ocean falling into the sun. Mutu, Kimutu, Babatu, Baba. River, ocean falling into the sun, and when all languages are forgotten and our day of life is done, only when we stand together can we say that we have won. When you and I are one. One love, one heart, one.
Another big round of applause for ladies and gentlemen, it's either you are creative or you are not. It's either you are an academic or you are not. She is simply, yes, definitely. Another big round of applause for Philippa Yadi-Filius. Let us proceed with our program. Ladies and gentlemen, let us allow me to introduce you to a special guest who's just about to come and address us. This outstanding leader can be introduced in so many different ways. And it is not an easy task. Let me just say, he is a true revolutionary, a long-time trade unionist, a seasoned politician, a friend of Cuba, and a friend of Comrade Fidel Castro, and one of South Africa's finest sons. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me, as I welcome to the stage former President of South Africa, Comrade Kgalema Motlanthe.
Thank you very much, Program Director, for your kind words of introduction. I've had many occasions where I had to listen to my obituary being read. So you were very benign by being so brief. Thank you very much. Ms. Jane Mufamadi, CEO of Freedom Park, and Council Member Professor Mushen Gondo, the Speaker of the National Assembly, Ms. Balekambete, and your husband, Comrade Nathi Mthethwa, Minister of Arts and Culture, Your Excellency Rodolfo Benitez Verson, Cuban Ambassador to South Africa, and all the Cuban veterans, and former combatants, and internationalists here present. Your Excellency, Mr. Veiko K. Giwete, Ambassador of Namibia. Comrade Ace Magashule, Secretary General of the African National Congress. Comrade Stumodlamini, President of COSATU. Comrade Reneva Fourie, Secretariat Coordinator of the Central Committee of the South African Communist Party. Ms. Lefika Chetty, representative of Friends of Cuba Society. Professor Mandla Makanya, members of the Diplomatic Corps, comrades and friends, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for inviting me to address you this evening to provide remarks in commemoration of such a memorable and momentous event in Southern African history. Is indeed a profound honor and great privilege. While celebratory,
This occasion is simultaneously marked by an inescapable pathos that we are required to reshape into unrelenting, tenacious action that shifts the landscape of the present in tribute to the legacy of one of the world's paramount leaders and a watershed moment in the history of our region. This year marks the confluence of multiple sites of memory, of which we celebrate two, as we duly honor the 100th year of Nelson Mandela and the 30th anniversary of the Battle of Cuito Cuanavale. Intersecting the inheritance bequeathed by this iconic figure and a turning point in liberation history is an invitation to reimagine the vision that underscored the pursuit of peace, self-determination, and solidarity throughout Mandela's life and on the battlefields of a small southeast Angolan town. Such a concomitant vision, built in the founding tenets of democracy and belief in humanism, must endure in spite of, and indeed because of, the present challenges. Tonight's event is similarly located as a celebration of the enduring friendship between Cuba and South Africa. The connection between our countries is epitomized by the relationship between the two leaders that cemented our kinship, solidarity, and shared beliefs in the freedom, equality, and rights of all through their own singular bond. Somewhere between this town of Pretoria and Johannesburg lies a small farm called Lily's Leaf Farm. And in the years following the burning of the African National Congress, the leadership converged on that farm to try and work out a response to the burning of the African National Congress, to determine what the next step was going to be. They pretended to be farm laborers, they pretended to be farmers, until, of course, they were arrested in 1963. And during their trial, Nelson Mandela made his seminal address and delivered a statement from the dock, whose words at the end, when he declared that he has waged a struggle against white domination and black domination, and that he had lived to attain a society in which all would have equal opportunities, and that this ideal he was prepared to die for, if needs be. He used very skillfully the trial to explain the rationale and context of the struggle waged by the African people in this country. Similarly, somewhere in Santiago de Cuba lies a farm which in 1953 was occupied by the generation of the centenary, which included Fidel Castro, Juan de Almeida, Raul Castro, and many others. And they too pretended on that farm to be involved in poultry farming. And it was from that farm that they launched an attack on the Moncada garrison. And when they were arrested, during their trial, Fidel Castro delivered a statement from the dock, which later came to be known as "History Shall Absolve Me." These leaders were incarcerated on penal islands. Here in South Africa, Robben Island, the island which later became the Isle of Youth. Upon their release, they continued to lead their people to freedom. And one quote from Fidel Castro, when he said about Mandela, and I quote, "We are in the presence of one who is truly a marvel of work and intelligence," close quote. These sentiments were undoubtedly shared as the global figures stand as metonyms for the nations they governed. The comradeship that underscores South Africa's relationship with Cuba throughout epochs is the direct consequence of the country's selfless assistance during the liberation struggles of multiple nations on our continent. Such a diplomatic bond is therefore founded on decades of solidarity, premised on a shared history of slavery and domination, and anti-imperialist ideology that Mandela and Castro held in common. As Nelson Mandela noted on a visit to Cuba in 1991, in the province of Matanzas, shortly after his release from prison, and I quote, "To the Cuban people, internationalism is not only a word, but something which they have put into practice for the benefit of large sectors of mankind. The Cuban people hold a special place in the hearts of people of Africa. The Cuban internationalists have made a contribution to African independence, freedom, and justice unparalleled for its principled and selfless character," close quote. There is no instance that stands as a greater illustration of these words than the event that occasions our gathering this evening, the Battle of Cuito Cuanavale, acknowledged as the largest battle on African soil since World War II. That we assemble at Freedom Park holds significant meaning. Here, the names of 2,289 fallen Cuban soldiers who volunteered their service in Angola are inscribed alongside those of South African liberation heroes. In death, as in life, their intimacy is a reminder of our transcendent bond and the values and gains that we cannot allow to descend into decay. It is a matter of great historical irony that a small town at the confluence of two rivers from which it draws its name, Cuito Cuanavale, would come to exemplify ideals far greater than its size implies. In a region so remote that the Portuguese referred to it as the land at the end of the earth, approximately 70,000 military combatants fought in a high-stakes battle for multiple countries in the grip of imperialist, colonial, and racist rule. To understand the sheer weight of its impact, if we trace a line through history, the developments of the 1980s and 1990s in South Africa and independence of Namibia can be traced back to this iconic confrontation between the government of Angola and the Angolan rebels, supplemented by international assistance, occurring in the backdrop of the Cold War, such that the author Vladimir Shubin refers to it as the last hot battle of the Cold War. It was undoubtedly a defining moment in Southern African politics, shifting the landscape and indefinitely altering the course of
history. As Nelson Mandela noted, in the context of South Africa, it marked, and I quote, a turning point for the liberation of our continent and our people, close quote. Fought on the banks of the Lomba River in the province of Cuando Cubango, this iconic battle emerged in the wake of Angolan independence in 1975. Between 1987 and the 23rd of March 1988, FAPLA and Cuban forces, in part assisted by Plan soldiers, would fight for justice against UNITA, supported by the United States of America, as well as apartheid South African government, in a conflict waged along ideological lines of racism, colonialism, and imperialism that remain an enduring feature of modern life. There are multiple accounts of the battle's outcome. Some claim the apartheid regime made a tactical retreat, or believe the battle concluded in stalemate, while claims of limited objectives from the former government persist. However, as former Deputy Minister of Defense and former Minister of Intelligence Ronnie Castral's notes, and I quote, "The acid test in this continuing debate is the outcome, which was the end of apartheid. The South African Defense Force, which had carried out continuous invasions and incursions into Angola since that country's had won independence in 1975, and the reason for the Cuban military presence in the first place, had been forced totally to withdraw. The independence of Namibia had been agreed upon, and the prospect of South African freedom had never been more promising. Before the battle for Cuito Cuanavale started in October 1987, the apartheid regime was implacably opposed to any of those options, close quote. To quote academic Keith Somerville, and I quote, "One must view it in the light of the maxim of the 19th century military theorist Karl von Clausewitz, that war is the continuation of politics by other means," close quote. The significance of Cuba's contribution to the battle, comprised of their finest pilots, sophisticated armory, and military might, is perhaps most clearly depicted in their tactical construction of an airstrip along the Angolan and Namibian border at Kahama and Shangongo, within striking distance of 2 hydroelectric dams systems, while sending troops further east, hence fencing the South African military forces within an encirclement. Fidel Castro later described this strategy as being like a boxer who, with his left hand, blocks the blow and with his right hand strikes, close quote. The actions of joint forces in Angola, with profound contributions by volunteer Cuban combatants and military equipment that crossed the Atlantic, resulted in profound victories. The events at Cuito Cuanavale brought South African border war to an end, led to peace negotiations that culminated in the withdrawal of the South African Defense Force, as well as Cubans from Angola and Namibian independence in March 1990 through negotiations which began in early 1988 and continued in May 1989. The heroic role played by the Cubans can only be understood if you really truly understand the distance that they had to cover from Cuba to Angola. And for that to be accomplished, they had to convert ordinary planes and add where the baggage racks, they converted those into fuel tanks so that they could cover the distance across the Atlantic to Angola in very small, ordinary passenger planes. And so literally they flew in bombs to get themselves into Angola. And as Fidel Castro stated, justifying the Cuban intervention, and I quote, "We knew that those events would have a profound influence on the life of South Africa. And it was one of the reasons, one of the motivations, one of the great stimuli that drove us, because we knew that by solving the problem there in Angola, the forces that fought against apartheid would also receive the benefits of our struggles," close quote. The Battle of Cuito Cuanavale is a watershed event in our collective history. The vision that inspired the liberation forces who stood in solidarity on foreign land did so in spite of differences and because of our indisputably shared struggle. In pursuit of the highest humanist ideals that transcends the ages, our arrival at this moment in history was initiated by the actions of a brave multitude in service of a dream of a liberated future that is our inheritance. In honoring this legacy of this battle and the life and work of Nelson Mandela, we are called to persistently defend the ideals of peace, justice, equality, self-determination, and freedom, both within and outside our borders. The internationalist spirit that continues to inspire Cuban solidarity must become our own, particularly when Cuba finds itself in need, be it through natural disasters or other emergencies. In these moments, we must immediately mobilize our resources in the same manner that Cuba rapidly assists all nations facing crisis, sending doctors, experts, and other forms of aid. Doing so most acutely honors the legacy of Cuito Cuanavale and Nelson Mandela, because the Cubans have taught us that when you give and therefore you sacrifice something, your ability, your own ability to equal challenges that confront you is enhanced tenfold. And so we need to learn and take to heart this lesson that to give is itself a self-enhancing act. And you shouldn't give only when you think you have plenty or surplus. You should give even when you have very little to share. I remember Pedro Ross, who was Secretary General of the CTC, the Cuban Trade Union Federation, saying to me, if there's only a piece of rock left for Cubans to share, the Cubans will share that. Therefore, it is fitting that I close with the words of the great South African statesman who said of the Battle of Cuito Cuanavale, and I quote, "If today all South Africans enjoy the rights of democracy, if they are able at last to address the grinding poverty of a system that denied them even the most basic amenities of life, it is also because of Cuba's selfless support for the struggle to free all South Africa's people and the countries of our region from the inhumane and destructive system of apartheid, close quote. The defeat of the apartheid army served as an inspiration to the struggling people of South Africa. Cuito Cuanavale marks the divide in the struggle for the liberation of Southern Africa. Cuito Cuanavale marked an important step in the struggle to free the continent and our country of the scourge of apartheid. But before I step down, I want to also add my voice in the words of the Secretary General of the African National Congress when he says, this agreement, which was signed by Madiba and Fidel Castro for the training of doctors, should never be discontinued. And we must prepare meticulously for the return of these young South Africans who received training as doctors in Cuba. The return of plus 700 of them is imminent. They will be coming back anytime in July to this country. And we need to know whether our teaching hospitals are ready to absorb them or not. We need to know that they will be integrated into our medical system because they are trained primarily on prevention. And our system is curative. We wait for people to get ill, and then we meet them at the hospitals. But these young doctors who will be coming back here are trained to prevent infections. And that's what primary health care is about. And I think we should all commit to ensure that this program will continue. A few years ago, Dr. Pinto Ferro, who was in charge of international relations in the Central Committee, even suggested that, given the fact that South Africa has all the facilities, the program could actually be strengthened by availing these facilities so that Cuban professors can come here and train these young Africans from our own soil. And that's something that we must consider and get our leaders, at least the SGs here, to embrace this approach, because the health of our people is a priority. Health of our people is a priority. The resources that are used to wait for them in hospitals can be saved and therefore used much, much better in improving the quality of life of our people. But this requires of us to be single-minded about it and deliberate about it. It will not happen unless we are determined to see it through. And that's the only way in which we can honor the memory of Fidel and Madiba and those who fell in this battle which gave us freedom. Thank you for your kind attention.
Another big round of applause for the former President of the Republic of South Africa. Esteemed guests, allow me to take this opportunity to share with you a calamity that befell the people of Cuba. Hurricane Irma swept Cuba from east to west with category 5, which happens to be a maximum in the scale. The strong winds and heavy rains caused more than 1 million people to be evacuated from low-lying areas of central Cuba provinces. There are people who are not silent. Please lend me your ears, especially for this particular item. Hurricane Irma severely impacted much of the Cuban national territory, with 158,554 affected homes, almost 15,000 of which suffered total collapse. 980 health institutions and 2,264 schools were affected. 95,000 hectares of various crops were hit and destroyed. The hurricane was so strong that it caused a total collapse of the national power grid, something that had never happened before in the history of Cuba. 10 people were killed. Total damages caused by the hurricane reached $13.6 billion. I said billion. Soon after the passage of Irma, international solidarity played an essential role in expediting the recovery effort undertaken by the Cuban people. In the case of South Africa, the Friends of Cuba Society, commonly known as FOCUS, played the leading mobilizing role and launched a fund collection drive where ordinary South Africans made contributions. To symbolically deliver the funds collected by the people of South Africa to the brotherly people of Cuba, allow me to introduce Comrade Lifika Chetty, who, on behalf of FOCUS and all South Africans, will present the Ambassador of Cuba with a solidarity check as a token of friendship and assist Cuba in its recovery effort in the aftermath of Hurricane Irma. I would like to call upon Comrade Lifika to come to the fore.
To the leadership of the African National Congress present, to the leadership of the South African Communist Party present, to the leadership of the COSATU present, all diplomats from our various embassies present, President Khalima Motlanthe, Minister of Arts and Culture present, all protocols observed. On behalf of the Friends of Cuba Society, more commonly known as FOCUS, I would like to extend our revolutionary greetings to this activity in commemorating 30 years after the Battle of Cuito Cuanavale and the centenary of Madiba. We have just returned from Cuba, and I would be out of revolutionary comportment if I did not mention this. Last month, we also saw the election of Comrade Miguel Díaz-Canel as the leader of the Cuban Revolution. We are certain that he will continue a path for a better world for all peoples, as is the backbone of Cuba's internationalist character. Comrades, one of the roles of focus is to encourage people-to-people relations. We have just returned from Cuba after attending a very successful May Day brigade. During these brigades, including our own Alex Leguma Brigade, named after our own veteran of our struggle, we are able to exchange with Cuban reality, to be able to partake in voluntary work in Cuba, to understand realities within the political and social systems. President Motlanthe, Comrade Ace, the leadership of the Communist Party has already spoken about us receiving more than 700 young students that will be trained in Cuba mid-year this year. And we are hoping that these young people will be able to impact on the lives of our rural poor, of our urban poor, as is our doctors from Cuba that is currently doing in the far-stretched rural areas of our country. I think that President Samora Machel put it very clearly when he said that international solidarity is not an act of charity. It is an act of unity between allies fighting on different terrains but towards the same objective. So today, Ambassador Verson, allow me on behalf of Focus to hand over to you the contribution as an act of solidarity between the peoples of South Africa and the peoples of Cuba.
Thank you, Lifika. A big round of applause. To Focus and to people who give, despite the fact that they also don't have enough. And now, I'll take this opportunity to call upon His Excellency, Ambassador of Cuba, Comrade Rodolfo Benitez Vasson, for the closing remarks of the evening. Before he comes to the fore, I just want to tell you something. Simpiwe Dana is in the house. Tswelopele Cultural Group are in the house. So please, when the ambassador had spoken, let us not depart. Ambassador, please come to the fore. Let's give him a big round of applause as he comes to the podium.
Well, dear friends and comrades, I know it's very late, but I request your indulgence for a few minutes for these concluding remarks. Comrade Kgalema Motlanthe, former President of the Republic of South Africa. Comrade Baleka Mbete, Speaker of the National Assembly. Comrade Kosinati Matewa, Minister of Arts and Culture. Comrade Ace Magashule, Secretary General of the African National Congress. Comrade Zdumo Lamini, President of COSATU. Comrade Reniva Furik, Secretariat Coordinator of the Central Committee of the South African Communist Party. Ms. Jane Mufamadi, CEO of Freedom Park. Ms. Olisa Toms, Chair of Portfolio Committee of Arts and Culture. my dear colleagues, ambassadors and high commissioners of the diplomatic corps, my dear brothers and sisters from Focus, and of course, my dear compatriots, the Cuban veterans, combatants in Africa. And I will request them to rise for a second. Le pido a los compañeros que fueron entregados el diploma hoy y de las Fuerzas Armadas que están aquí, por favor, que se levanten un momento. I will request them to rise for a round of applause because those are our heroes. Thank you very much. Dear comrades, allow me at the outset to express our most heartfelt appreciation to each of you for your presence here today. Our profound thanks to the noble people of South Africa who mobilized and raised funds to assist under the leadership of the Friends of Cuba Society Focus in the Cuban people's recovery effort in the aftermath of Hurricane Irma. Just a few minutes ago, in the context of the 30th anniversary of Battle of Cuito Cuanavale and the Month of Africa, we had the honor of paying tribute to the victims of colonialism, racism, and oppression in Africa, and to the heroes who sacrificed their life in the struggle for justice and freedom. We did so at the base of the magnificent Remembrance Wall that preserved the memory of hundreds of thousands of those victims and heroes, including the names of 2,289 Cubans who sacrificed their life as internationalist combatants in African soil. We could not find a more appropriate venue than Freedom Park for this event. Few places in the world can capture with such symbolism the values and the sentiments that tie us to the people of South Africa, as well as the meaning of what the Cuban Revolution stands for. Freedom Park inspires us to recognize the value of history and help us to avoid the mistake of forgetting it. So thank you, my dear sister Jane and her staff, for being the most wonderful hosts. Dear friends, since this is not only an event of solidarity with Cuba, but also solidarity with those causes of the world, I will go for some seconds outside my prepared statement to refer to the terrible news we have received today from Palestine. Probably you know that as a result of attacks that occurred today, several thousand of Palestine have been killed as a result of the attack of the Israeli occupying forces. So I cannot do anything else but to take this opportunity to pay tribute to those new martyrs and to reiterate our firm solidarity with the Palestinian people, as it is the case with our strong solidarity with the Bolivarian Revolution of Venezuela. Thank you very much for that. Dear friends, relations between Africa and Cuba are profound and historic. Cuba's direct contribution to African liberation struggles was a moral duty. We were simply repaying a historical debt owed to our ancestors. As a result of the cruel Atlantic slave trade, nearly 1,003,000 of Africans arrived in our island centuries ago. Their presence made a huge mark on our country. Africa is part of the very essence of our nation. Cubans are a Latin African people, and we feel extremely proud of our African roots. Since the triumph of the Cuban Revolution in 1959, our country became an active supporter of the wave of national liberation in the African continent and was an early and loyal supporter of the struggle against apartheid in South Africa. Cuba denounced the imprisonment of Nelson Mandela and his comrades when they were still fairly unknown in many parts of the world and when they were labeled as terrorists by several governments. Many people don't know that as early as 1961, even before the Rivonia trial, young South Africa from the anti-apartheid forces started to arrive in Cuba to receive professional training in medicine and sciences. It was the first group of many that in the following decades would receive professional education and military training in Cuba and in other places. Our country was a home for many South Africans during the dark night of the apartheid operation. Dear friends, there is an African saying according to which the footprints of the people that walk together can never be erased. The deep and special relationship between Cuba and Africa was cemented in the battlefields of the southern Angola, where almost 500,000 of Cubans joined their fate with that of African combatants to reject the military intervention of apartheid and imperialism in the continent. The remote town of Cuito Cuanavale in Angola became a symbol of resistance and courage after the victory against the army of the opprobrious apartheid regime. By the beginning of November 1987, the South African Armed Forces had encircled the best Angola's units in that village and were preparing to annihilate them. The fall of Cuito Cuanavale was then imminent, which would mean a devastating blow to the Angolan government and the progressive forces in Southern Africa. The army of racist South Africa counted for its offensive with powerful forces. Both the South African army and the puppet army group UNITA were openly supported by the United States, which supplied them with sophisticated surface-to-air Stinger missiles, anti-tank missiles, and millions of dollars in military aid after the US Congress rescinded the Clark Amendment. This is just factual. In that context, Cuba quickly responded to the Angolan government call for assistance. Some dozen of Southern volunteer Cuban combatants, along with the vital military equipment, traveled more than 10,000 kilometers from the Caribbean and crossed the former Atlantic. On March 23rd, 1988, the South Africans and UNITA launched their last major assault against Cuito, but they were definitely stopped by the revolutionary forces of Angola, Cuba, SWAPO at the MK. African leader Oliver Tambo referred to Cuito Cuanavale battle as the Waterloo of the racist South Africa. Nelson Mandela could say about Cuba's participation in the fighting, and I quote, "Your presence and the reinforcement sent to the Battle of Cuito Cuanavale have a truly historic importance. That overwhelming defeat of the racist army in Cuito Cuanavale gave Angola the chance to enjoy peace and consolidate its own sovereignty. The defeat of the racist army allowed the fighting people of Namibia to finally achieve their independence. The decisive defeat of the Eurasian forces of apartheid destroyed the myth of the invincibility of the white oppressor. Cuito Cuanavale marks the turn in the struggle to rid the continent and our country of the scourge of apartheid." End of the quote. Our troops returned to Cuba with their heads held high, taking with them only the friendship of the African peoples, the satisfaction of the duty accomplished, and the glorious remains of our fallen brothers and sisters. We will never regret having written in Cuito Cuanavale one of the most beautiful pages in the history of solidarity among peoples and among revolutionaries. Dear friends, this year we are also commemorating the centenary of Nelson Mandela. South Africa was indeed privileged to have had Madiba. He started a struggle for freedom, his humility, compassion, and humanity earned him the respect of the world. For Cubans, Nelson Mandela is a symbol of the special bonds that unite Cuba and South Africa. In his autobiography, Madiba explained that while in prison, he found inspiration in Fidel Castro, Che Guevara, and the Cuban Revolution. Mandela and Fidel had a relationship very special, based on admiration, inspiration, and respect. They always met with the greeting, "My brother." After Mandela was released from prison, he traveled to Cuba. He wanted to thank our country for the solidarity in the liberation struggle. Mandela's 1991 visit to Cuba to show solidarity with our country had come at a very difficult time for us, when socialism worldwide was collapsing. We will never forget what he did, and he was welcomed in our island by millions of people, and I can proudly say I was one of them. Dear friends, 59 years ago, the Cuban nation embarked on a quest to achieve its true and definitive independence, committed to build a fair and equitable society. In a world where the dominant narrative is free market fundamentalism and is characterized by individualism, materialism, greed, and inequality, Cuba has shown that it is possible to create an alternative society based on human solidarity, social justice, and national unity. Cuba is not perfect. Like anywhere, we face problems and struggles, but there are also many achievements to show. We are proud to be a country without people who are helpless or deprived from their dignity. We are proud to be a country that provides high-quality health care for all its population, completely free of charge. We are proud to be a country where life expectancy rate is 80 years of age, higher than in many rich countries. We are proud to have the highest number of doctors per capita in the world. We have one doctor every 113 inhabitants. And the best infant mortality rate of the whole Western Hemisphere. We are proud that the whole Cuban population receives high-quality education at all levels, including universities, and this is guaranteed as a right in our Constitution. The Cuban Revolution is and will continue to be under the leadership of our new president, Comrade Miguel Díaz-Canel, a true working-class revolution. The continuity of the revolution built under Commander Fidel Castro leadership is guaranteed. Dear friends, our decision to defend our national independence and to support the struggle of other countries has come with a high cost, and we have to speak here frankly. United States hostility against the Cuban Revolution is in a big part a punishment for our solidarity with the liberation struggles of Africa and Latin America. Since 1960, Cuba has suffered from a criminal, unilateral, and illegal economic, commercial, and financial blockade imposed by the US government. It is the longest blockade ever recorded in history. The present President of the United States has decided to strengthen even more the blockade and the hostility against Cuba, with the aim, public goal of imposing in Cuba a regime change. But he will fail. He will fail as it was the case with the previous 11 US administration that tried to defeat the Cuban Revolution. Cuba will not negotiate its principles, never. Despite all hardships, we will never renounce our right to independence and sovereignty. The change that may be necessary will be independently decided only by the Cuban people. Despite all scarcities and difficulties derived from the criminal blockade, our people will continue selflessly sharing what it has with other nations. Cuban international cooperation workers are present in all continents today. 46,000 of them are currently helping in 61 nations, with a great presence in Africa, including South Africa. Cuban universities have contributed to the formation of thousands of young people from 36 African nations. Today, we are training in Cuba doctors for more than 100 countries. Dear friends, we treasure South Africa's firm and sustained solidarity with Cuba. President Cyril Ramaphosa has described relations between South Africa and Cuba as solidarity in practice, and we fully agree with that. There are thousands of friends of Cuba throughout this beautiful country, from Port One to Cape Town, from Gauteng to Durban. The genuine solidarity with our island all across Africa confirms that international relations are, first and foremost, relations among peoples. Cuba will forever be thankful to you for supporting our demand to end the illegal and criminal blockade that our country is enduring. We could never thank you enough for your support in the struggle for the release of our 5 anti-terrorists Cuban heroes. We thank you for supporting the immediate return to Cuba of the territory illegally occupied by the Guantanamo naval base, which the US government has maintained for more than 100 years against the wishes of the Cuban people. We thank you for supporting our demand that Cuba's right to self-determination and sovereignty and our right to decide the political system of our choice be respected. With a lot of emotion and pride, we accepted today, on behalf of 11 million Cubans, the contributions collected by the nobles of African people to assist in the relief efforts in the aftermath of Hurricane Irma. We will never forget this new demonstration of true solidarity, which, by the way, is the most potent weapons in the hands of revolutionaries. Let me conclude, dear comrades and friends, recalling Oliver Tambo when he said, and I quote, "The fight for freedom must go on until it is won." End of quote. Cuba is determined to continue to fight together with you for a better world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Now I'm going to call upon a cultural group called Tswelopele to come and entertain us. Please do not leave. Sipiwa Dana is going to close this session. You don't want to miss it. Internationally acclaimed, she needs no introduction. Just hold on. For now, we're going to listen to Tswelopele Cultural Group. Tswelopele.